All righty.
We have launched.
Welcome, everybody. Planet Green Trees. Officially, episode 152. We're calling it the MMA 101 Part 2. We continue our analysis and discussion of the evolution of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act since its election in 2008 and how it's been implemented. But first, I want to welcome everybody. Again, Planet Green Trees, episode 152. I'm your host, Michael Komorn. Joining me, co-hosting Chad from the Birmingham Compassion Club.
Good evening.
Also in the studio, Jamie Lowell, Third Coast Compassion Center.
Hello.
Rick Thompson, Compassion Chronicles, editor-in-chief, and much more.
Thank you.
And our special guest joining us in studio, my good friends, Dewey and Pam Thomas. Welcome, everybody. No microphone near them, but they're waving. All right, so we are going to continue, as I said, tonight in our MMA series discussion of the history and pertinent events concerning the MMA. We're encouraging people to call in, add their thoughts, comments, and recollection of things as we try to learn from what's happened and use it to our advantage moving forward. Hoping to join in that discussion is going to be our good friend, warrior, frequent guest, someone I like to call the Professor John Targowski, attorney. He'll be updating us on his recent recovery from his injuries sustained in an accident while he was out west and what his thoughts are on the history of the MMA and what he anticipates in the upcoming months and years. Also calling in will be our friend Steve Green of the Human Solution. He'll be updating us on various court proceedings that are taking place and where people can lend their support. Patients, caregivers being dragged through the system. Also, spotlight tonight as we have an ongoing series of various organizations working diligently to try to reform or implement laws that should be. And tonight we have from the Jackson County Compassion Club, Roger Maufort. In part, Roger will be discussing medical marijuana education club offers to the community as well as interactions with local government and other marijuana reform efforts taking place in Jackson. Also, tonight, where I'm going to do a rant in a little while, we've got news from Rick Thompson and discussion of events and much more. Obviously, other contributions for tonight's show come from Rick Thompson of the Compassion Chronicles, Jamie Lowell, Third Coast Compassion Center. Jamie, of course, is the producer of Planet Green Trees. Any complaints of anything should be directed specifically to him. Sponsors for tonight's show, Komorn Law, 1-800-656-3557. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, michiganmedicalmarijuana.org. I want to thank all the moderators who volunteer their time, effort, and support to create a safe, comfortable environment for those forums to present a community of discussion of the medical cannabis and the evolution of it in our culture and our way of thinking and being applied as in a medicinal way. Also, I want to give a shout-out to our good friend Kevin Spittler of Stamo, Michigan, and what was formerly known as the MedJoint Community Compassion Center. Also, we know Kevin's working diligently on the No-Hio reform movement, believing that at some point they will have an initiative on the ballot. Those in that area, see Kevin and sign a petition. Also, I want to give a thanks to our other sponsor, the Marijuana Rancher. I know he's got some kind of events. See them on Facebook or call 1-3134-225281. All right, so that's the backdrop of tonight's show. We're calling it, of course, 152 MMA 101 Part 2. Also, I just want to point to that any questions or you want to have something read or answered, we're using the forum, right, Chad? Is that right? Sure. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Association chat room or the forum? What are we doing?
The chat room.
Chat room. Chad will be monitoring. Please go there and post questions.
The Chad room.
Yeah. Call the chat room.
That's at MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org, everyone. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org.
All right, so last week, for those that were listening, we began to talk about some of the history of the Michigan medical marijuana. We think sometimes on the show we get into such a intensified debate or discussion of intricacies in the minutia. Sometimes, even though I disagree with this, that the listeners, we need a backdrop. And we wanted to take it back simple and give a little bit each week to little backdrop, education, and understandings for persons that want to get the whole big picture. So last week we spoke about the initiative itself. We talked about the various points of it and how was then written into the law and how it's been interpreted. We didn't really get into the cases yet, but we were calling that the Renaissance era. That was the period of time between the ballot initiative, it being voted in 2008, and what we were calling the first raids in about August 2010. So it was the Renaissance era. It was the beginning of the era. It was a new birth. But again, last week we did talk about the initiative a little bit. One thing I failed to mention that, and like to when I can, is that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, Proposal 1, had result in voting of 3,008,980 people, 63% of Michigan voters. There was not one county that did not vote in the majority. And what cannot be understated is that this election had never had, or this issue had never had more votes cast than any other election in the history of Michigan elections, meaning there's never been a candidate or another issue on a ballot that received as many votes as the Michigan Medical Marijuana. And I say that because it's an important place to start, just because of the overwhelming support, and that can't really say that it exists with such overwhelming support across the state of Michigan. What other bill competes with it? What other law competes with it?
Nothing.
There's no legislator that's been elected into office with so many votes supporting them that their bills could be considered the equivalent thereof.
No president.
No president. So I'd say that as the beginning of this. Some of the historical points, as we lay the backdrop here, and I want to talk about a couple of significant cases, but that kind of lead up to what was happening, was that at the time, of course, between 2008 and 2010, there was a Democratic government, although it was in a lame duck session. There was a Representative Durhal, still now he's running for the mayor of the city of Detroit, but he had a task force where he had invited multiple groups to come and discuss the issues. And I thought it was one of the best things to take place. One of the inherent flaws, I think, that has taken place in the implementation of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is there's not been a real effort to try to educate. And education begins with discussion and trying to understand, and we're in a completely new era here, so the education comes from both sides. And I think Representative Durhal, to his credit, and even I think the co-joint, I don't know whatever you want to call it, was Representative Jones.
Yeah,
at the time.
I do remember that.
And, of course, at that time, our good friend George Cushenberry, who's running again for, not sure, good Richard back on.
Second district of council in Detroit. I think.
That's right, City Council?
City council
right.
in Detroit. I believe
great.
The same district where Greg's place is, actually.
That's district. Highland Park. In that area right by Highland Park, yes.
But at the time, Cushenberry, of course, very active in the marijuana reform movement, was the head of the Appropriations Committee, I think, right?
Yeah,
at the time.
Cushenberry?
Cushenberry.
And he instructed Representative Durhal to
conduct
form these stakeholder meetings.
So the stakeholder meetings are going. It was just such a different time from where we sit now. We were discussing why we would, if we'd ever be able to get someone like a Jessica Cooper or one of our representatives or someone from the Attorney General's office. And I don't know that they would want to, because there'd have to be a open discussion and debate, and there may be a reasonableness involved. And we think and
they're
would
not
argue
into that.
And they're not into that. Simple as that. But again, I'm reflecting, and we're talking historically, and it was a completely different time. And the other factor in this was Mike Cox, who at the time was criticized for not being more active. One would say, there's other attorney generals that have played a more active role in helping the implementation of the law, but I think everyone would agree we'd take him back in a heartbeat over what's happening right now.
Schuette has definitely had a hand in it.
He has.
That you could definitely see.
But no position is better than the, righteous indignation and pursuit of issues that he knows are failed policies and really not intellectually accurate. Nevertheless, there was a transition at some point. 2010, everything changed. A new governor and a new attorney general, and the pounding of the chest and the screams from the blowhorn were that this law is full of holes. And I remember distinctly what was happening at this point. I think one of the key factors that took place in this period of time was the Holder Memorandum, which we've decided was October 2009, where the federal government was not going to interfere with states that had, or patients or caregivers that were acting in compliance with state law. So during this period of time, of course, we saw dispensaries begin to develop and different types of clubs, and what was a compassion club had different meaning from the original meaning as outlined in the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. And it seemed as if medical marijuana was becoming an industry development. There was publications, there was grow stores, there was expos, there was all kinds of activity that was happening. And the newness of it, in some areas, government agencies backed off, some acted aggressively, and there was a real disparity across the state as far as how things were being handled. And the cases began to come out, and this is where I have some personal interactions, and I want to talk about some of them. And I remember even speaking about some of these cases at the task force. I remember speaking with, or sometimes friend, or at least brother counsel, Ken Stecker. I was sitting at the table with him and the head of the state police. We were discussing search warrant executions. We were discussing what happens when law enforcement believes, and maybe rightfully so, and have a reason to believe that there was marijuana being grown, and we have no reason to know that it was a caregiver because they wouldn't have access to the registry. And they would say, well, that's why we need access to the registry. I say, well, independent of that, if you're executing the search when you get in there and they see a card, what are you going to do? Are you going to stop or are you going to leave? They're like, no, we're going in. And then I said, well, what about, I described, what would I describe as this other case that we had, the Ferretti case, which was a little bit different in that it wasn't when they were immediately inside of the house, because the search warrant is an order to search and seize, but the Ferretti case was one where they learned that they were medical marijuana patients before they went in at some distance where they had time to reflect and even contemplate whether or not what they thought was probable cause of crimes being committed was based upon now knowing that there was medical marijuana being grown within the facility. And that was kicked around for a little while and ultimately resolved after a bad Court of Appeals ruling. But at that time, there was other significant cases that I want to refer to. One which comes to mind because of my recent interactions back in the same court, but I had a trial dealing with what has now become, almost silly and laughable to reflect back on it in light of People versus Kuhn in the Michigan Supreme Court, where the court ruled that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has meaning, and that Section 7E of the Act says any laws that conflict with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has meaning, and if there are laws that conflict with it, Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is going to trump it. I argued those same things, ironically. I would even say almost exact, similar as the Supreme Court ruled. Well, at least in terms of extrapolating and using the words outlined in Section 7E as a reason why in a trial that I had in Livingston County that charged operating with any presence of a controlled substance, that be marijuana, and not being able to argue that that is not a crime when you're talking about medical marijuana patients, because obviously they're going to have it in their system, and something more would need to be proven, such as impairment. But nevertheless, I filed a motion to dismiss based on that, and the ruling at that time by the Honorable Court was that not only is my motion to dismiss denied, but I'm not going to be allowed to talk about medical marijuana at all for either of the charges. Well, at the end of the day, the jury found out about it, returned a verdict, found out, I should say, that my client was a medical marijuana patient. There was no bad driving. It was a kind of comical way in which they presented their case. And I do think that much of what took place in that case, not even being able to talk about medical marijuana, but getting out, should be significant in how patients look at, even if they're faced with driving charges, because I think the ability to prove impairment when someone has low levels of THC or any levels for that matter is not going to be as easy as the prosecutors may think. And they too are going to find that trying these cases, creating issues and picking up patients is not the way to go. And I mention that because in a historical context, my personal experience with fighting this case and involved with a court that was not recognizing the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, was not recognizing Section 7E, despite the fact that I believed it in my heart that the law stood for that. Here we go, 2013, People versus Kuhn, vindication on top of the vindication from the not guilty verdict. So here we are, 2013. I think there's a bunch of other cases that we could talk about. I think there's a Gupel case I often refer to, search warrant out of Shiawassee. But I think I want to end the stories there. I want to talk more historically about what really transpired next, which is the assault on dispensaries in general. I think it was right about this time which we're beginning the discussion after the Renaissance era, the evolution of some of the industry, the outgrowth of compassion clubs and dispensaries, and what had become really a self-regulated system that patients were having safe access. Some places may have been abusing it because of a lack of regulations. Some were functioning and were flourishing in the community, never even bringing up the concept of a quote-unquote nuisance, not a disturbance, but an asset to the community, and they existed. In those communities that they were existing know it, and it's difficult, in the McQueen decision 2013 to all of a sudden start calling facilities that are functioning without issue a nuisance. It's just kind of crazy. But at the time, without warning and with really no direction, and no notice, no asking to shut down, an assault on those facilities took place in Oakland County. Now, Oakland County was the leader in this time, 2010, about driving forward with a crusade against medical marijuana. And I'm not making that up. That is a quote from the prosecutor in the county. And if you look through the Court of Appeals cases that went up between 2009 and 2012 before the Michigan Supreme Court in, I think, June or July, People versus King, you'd find that the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office is one of the leaders in taking cases to the Court of Appeals and reversing, challenging dismissals and just failing to recognize the protections that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act seemed to design. But this took place across the state. I don't want to just pick on Oakland County. It was going on all over the state. And as it turned out, they continued to lead, but as it turned out, all of that was for naught. I often refer to the statistics at this time historically of the Court of Appeals that had heard on 19 cases, medical marijuana issues, and at 19 occasions they ruled in favor of prosecutors and against patients or caregivers, just completely eradicating the law. There was a point in time in Michigan's history, people may or may not know this, where if your grow room, your garden was not locked in and closed as defined by the time, you were going to be subject to no defense at all, no medical marijuana defense. But 2012 brought an end to that with the People versus King. But there's so much to talk about in terms of the dispensary onslaught. Maybe we'll get into that with some of our guests. I'm going to call it right there. That'll be part 2, and part 3 next week we'll get into some more of this. But and of course, throughout the show, people are going to add their thoughts and comments. All right, so you're listening to Planet Rangers. That's the rant for right now. Got an exciting show. John Targowski calling in. Steve Green from the Human Solutions, and Roger Maufort from Jackson County Compassion Club. Caller number is 1-347-326-9626. We will be right back.